If everything in life passes, why does this still hurt you? Perhaps this question arose at an unexpected moment, in the silence before sleep, in the middle of an ordinary day, or when you realized that, despite everything seeming resolved on the outside, something still throbs inside. It's not a scream, it's more like an echo, subtle, persistent, psychological. A pain that doesn't demand immediate attention, but also doesn't disappear. It just stays. You moved on. At least that's what the practical part of your mind tells you. You continued living, working, talking, smiling. You did what needed to be done, but on some conscious level, perhaps even a philosophical one, you feel that something hasn't kept pace with this movement, as if a part of you has stopped in time watching the world move forward without it. There's a silent conflict here, because everything around you reinforces the idea that time heals all wounds, that you just have to wait. That maturing means forgetting, but if that were entirely true, that feeling would have already dissolved. And it hasn't dissolved. On the contrary, it has transformed into a recurring thought, into tension in the body, into an internal narrative that you don't always perceive, but that influences your emotions, your choices, and even the way you relate to yourself. This pain isn't dramatic. It's aesthetic in the most minimalist sense possible. It doesn't make a scene. It doesn't demand a stage. It presents itself as emotional exhaustion, as a slight, nameless melancholy, as a feeling that something is out of place. And perhaps the most disconcerting thing is this: it doesn't seem logical to suffer for something that rationally has already passed. From a psychological point of view, the mind loves quick answers. It wants to close cycles, organize stories, label emotions. But some experiences escape this control. They don't demand immediate solutions. They demand presence. And that can be profoundly uncomfortable, because being present with what hurts requires awareness. It requires slowing down. It requires looking without trying to fix things. There is something poetic and at the same time unsettling in this human contradiction. We know that everything is impermanent. We've heard it in books, phrases, ancient philosophies. We repeat it like a modern mantra. It will pass. But repeating is not understanding. And understanding is not integrating. There is a silent abyss between knowing something intellectually and living it consciously. Perhaps the pain isn't just connected to what happened, but to how it was stored within you, not as a memory, but as a feeling, as an identity, as an interrupted expectation. And while you try to be practical, functional, productive, that inner part keeps asking for something more subtle, attention without judgment. Notice how this pain doesn't want to be fought. It doesn't react well to haste or denial. The more you try to push it away with positive thoughts or distractions, the more it camouflages itself, the more philosophical it becomes, the more abstract, until it becomes a background state of your daily experience. And this is where many people get lost, because no one teaches how to deal with this kind of conscious suffering. It's not clinical enough to be treated as a problem, nor mild enough to be ignored. It lives in this intermediate space, almost invisible, but profoundly human. Perhaps the mistake isn't in feeling this pain. Perhaps it's in trying to understand it only with a mind that wants to solve everything. There's something beyond time heals all wounds. Something quieter, more direct. Something that doesn't begin with answers, but with an honest observation of what still remains inside and why you keep holding on even without realizing it. Before we move on to the next part, I want to invite you to do something simple, but profoundly conscious. Don't just watch, participate. If this question resonated with you on any psychological, practical, or even philosophical level, write in the comments, what still hurts you today? You don't need to explain everything. Sometimes a single word is enough. When you name it, you begin to transform. And when many people do this together, something changes in the collective field of human experience. This space isn't about ready-made answers. It's about presence. It's about creating, here in the comments, an aesthetic and safe place where pain isn't seen as weakness, but as a sign of awareness. Each comment is a silent act of courage, and it might be exactly what someone else needed to read to not feel alone. If this content resonates with you, please leave a like. Not as an automatic gesture, but as an internal confirmation that you want more content that combines conscious mental health, philosophical depth, and a minimalist approach to the human experience. And if you're not already subscribed, subscribe now. This channel is a constant invitation to self-knowledge, to pause and to observe, and what follows in this video delves even deeper into what you're feeling right now. Stay here, because understanding why the pain persists is only the beginning. There's an idea that's repeated so often it's become almost an automatic reflex. Everything passes. It sounds mature, rational, even comforting. At many moments it really does seem to help, but there's a point where this phrase begins to silently fail. Because if everything really did pass the way we imagine, some pains wouldn't still be there, occupying space in your internal experience in such a discrete yet constant way. The common mistake isn't in recognizing impermanence. It's in interpreting it superficially. In common understanding, impermanence has become synonymous with disappearance, as if time had the practical function of erasing feelings, reorganizing emotions, and dissolving wounds without you needing to look at them. But Buddhism, in its most conscious and philosophical foundation, never claimed that. At no point did it say that pain simply disappears on its own. What he points out is something more subtle and perhaps more uncomfortable for the modern mind. Everything changes. Yes, everything is in flux. But suffering arises when we try to interrupt this movement internally, when something has already changed in reality but remains frozen within us. Impermanence is natural. Attachment is psychological. And it is in this difference that many people get lost. Notice how attachment is rarely obvious. It doesn't appear by saying, "I don't accept it." Then it disguises itself as a recurring memory, an unresolved expectation, a repetitive internal dialogue. It manifests as the unconscious need to revisit the past, trying to find a different version of what happened, not to change the fact itself, but to alleviate the feeling that has become trapped in the body and mind. And here arises an important confusion. Attachment is not love. It is not care. It is not emotional depth. Attachment is resistance. It is the attempt to keep alive something that has already fulfilled its external cycle, but which still defines your internal landscape. That is why certain pains do not age. They do not keep pace with time because they are being held outside the natural flow of experience. When you hear that everything is impermanent, you might imagine waves that come and go. But what almost no one mentions is that attachment acts like an invisible dam. The water keeps coming, time keeps passing, life keeps happening, but something gets trapped. And suffering is born from this silent stagnation. What hurts isn't what happened. It's what you're still holding on to. This phrase is not merely poetic. It is practical, psychological, and profoundly conscious, because it points directly to where attention needs to go. Not to the event, not to the story, not to the blame or the person involved, but to the internal act of holding on. Holding on can mean many things. It can mean holding on to an old identity, a version of yourself that made sense before but no longer holds up today. It can mean holding on to an expectation that was never fulfilled. It can mean holding on to the need for total understanding, for perfect closure, for an answer that may never come. And while all this is happening, the mind tries to convince itself that everything is resolved, because rationally it makes sense to move on. But human experience is not merely rational. It is sensory, emotional, and bodily, and what is not consciously experienced tends to repeat itself unconsciously. That is why some pains don't scream. They whisper. They appear in automatic decisions, in relationship patterns, in disproportionate reactions, in an existential weariness that is difficult to explain. Buddhism doesn't propose escaping this. It doesn't suggest positive thinking or forcing detachment. On the contrary, it points to the direct observation of experience, to see how attachment operates moment by moment, how it feeds on the idea of permanence in a world that by nature never stops, and how this attempt to freeze what has already changed creates internal friction. Notice how this reflection doesn't ask you to abandon anything now. It simply invites you to look more honestly, to notice where tension still exists, where control still exists, where the secret hope still exists that things will go back to the way they were before. This hope, when not acknowledged, transforms into silent suffering. Perhaps you've already told yourself that you've moved on. Perhaps you've heard it from others. But moving on, in this context, doesn't mean pushing it away. It means ceasing to hold on. And that requires a level of awareness that doesn't stem from haste, constant distraction, or the ready-made answers circulating around. Before we move on, I want to ask you something simple but important. If any part of this resonated with you, leave a comment at the end of the video with one of these phrases. Choose the one that resonates most with you right now. I still hold on. This stayed with me. Or, I'm learning to let go. If you want, just write one word. Sometimes that's how the process begins. What almost no one realizes is that attachment rarely appears under that name. It doesn't arrive saying, I am attached, nor does it present itself as an obvious problem. It is invisible precisely because it blends in with things that seem noble: loyalty, longing, a sense of justice, a need for explanation, a desire to close a cycle with dignity. But beneath all of that, there is a very specific psychological mechanism: the mind trying to avoid fully feeling what has not yet been accepted. And when I say, I accept, I don't mean accepting as someone who agrees. I mean accepting as someone who stops fighting with reality. It's a conscious, practical, almost minimalist movement, looking at what is, without adding extra layers. But that's where attachment defends itself, because true acceptance means allowing the experience to follow the natural flow of impermanence, and attachment wants the opposite. It wants to keep something fixed, even if it's pain. The pain lingers when we resist acceptance, and this resistance can be very subtle. Sometimes it disguises itself as, I just need to understand better. Other times it becomes, one day this will make sense, or if I had done things differently. And suddenly you find yourself trapped in a kind of mental labyrinth where each corridor leads to another thought, another attempt to rewrite the past, another conversation that never happened, another explanation that never came. This is very human. And, at the same time, it's exactly where the pain truly lives. Not in the raw event itself, but in the story you've built around it. Because the past in itself is already gone. What remains active is the film that the mind projects, repeating scenes with an extra detail, an extra phrase, an extra possibility. The mind is creative. It's philosophical when it wants to be. It's poetic when it's suffering. And often, it uses this creativity as a defense. If I think enough, maybe I won't need to feel. But feeling is inevitable. The difference is that when you don't feel it consciously, you feel it diffusely. It becomes tension in the chest, tightness in the throat, weight on the shoulders, tiredness without a clear cause. It becomes practical anxiety in daily life, minor irritation with small things, difficulty resting even when the body is at rest. Pain, when not acknowledged, finds other entry points. In Buddhism, there's a very direct honesty about this. Suffering grows when we cling to things. And this clinging can be clinging to a person, a phase, an identity, a promise, an expectation, a version of oneself. It can be clinging to the need to be recognized. It can be clinging to the image of how things should have been. And then a very specific pain is born. The pain of, it wasn't supposed to be like this, or loss, rejection, guilt, expectation. All of these have one thing in common. The mind tries to transform vulnerability into control. Loss hurts because it points to the fact that nothing is guaranteed. Rejection hurts because it touches on the human need for belonging and value. Guilt hurts because we try to go back in time to save a version of ourselves. Expectation hurts because it creates a parallel reality. And when life doesn't follow the script, internal friction appears. And this is where a Zen metaphor comes in that's almost impossible to forget once you truly understand it. It's like holding onto an ember, waiting for it to cool down. You hold on because you believe you need to. You hold on because you think letting go is losing something. You hold on because deep down you identify with it. But the more you hold on, the more it burns. And the most curious thing is, you might even get used to the heat. You might even normalize the pain. But it keeps burning, only now in silence. Invisible attachment is this: the normalization of what weighs you down. It's when you say, everything's fine with your mouth, but your body disagrees. It's when you follow your routine, but inside there's a sensitive point that reacts easily. It's when you distract yourself to avoid addressing the issue, or when you keep yourself too busy because emptiness scares you. And notice how practical this is in everyday life. The less internal space, the more external noise. The less presence, the greater the compulsion for movement. And it's not that you're wrong for doing that, you're human. It's just that there's a huge difference between being human in automatic mode and being human in conscious mode. Automatic mode creates stories. Conscious mode observes stories being created. Automatic mode wants to resolve things quickly. Conscious mode sustains the question long enough for the truth to emerge without violence. So, when the pain remains, it's worth investigating delicately. Where exactly does my attachment lie? Is it attachment to the person, or to the feeling that person gave me? Is it attachment to the past, or to the identity I had in that scenario? Is it attachment to what happened, or to what I wanted to have happened? Because sometimes what we call longing is actually frozen expectation, and what we call "I haven't gotten over it" is often resistance to accepting the end of a narrative. And there's an even deeper detail. Some mental stories are protected because they seem to give meaning to the pain. The mind prefers pain with an explanation to an unanswered void. That's why it creates internal phrases like, "I'm always abandoned," "Nobody understands me," "I ruin everything," "I'm not enough." It sounds philosophical, but it's a psychological cycle of identification. And every time you repeat this without realizing it, you hold the ember tighter. The conscious path begins when you see it happening as it happens, not afterward, not when it has already exploded, but in the instant the mental story emerges and you realize, this is a story. And if this resonates with you, stay with me, because in the next part, we're going to get to the point where observation changes everything, not as a pretty theory, but as real, breathable, applicable practice. And now, only at the end, tell me in the comments, which of these phrases best describes your current situation? I find myself reliving it. I still resist. I'm tired of holding on. Or, I want to learn to accept it. If you want, comment just one word: embering, attachment, or presence. This helps me understand you and helps this video reach more people who need to hear exactly this. When we talk about letting go, many people feel an immediate pang of anxiety, because letting go, in the common imagination, sounds like abandonment, like weakness, like giving up. It seems synonymous with erasing, forgetting, pretending nothing happened. And that's exactly where one of the greatest emotional confusions of human experience lies. Buddhist wisdom never spoke of forgetting pain. It speaks of not becoming confused by it. Letting go isn't about denying what you felt. It's not about minimizing the loss, the rejection, the guilt, or the frustrated expectation. It's not about saying it was nothing. On the contrary, letting go is a profoundly conscious, psychological, and practical act. It's recognizing that the pain exists, but realizing that it's not the totality of who you are. It's a phenomenon that arises, manifests itself, and, if not fueled by attachment, also transforms. The modern mind wants to resolve pain quickly. It wants a technique, an answer, a shortcut. But the Buddhist approach is almost disconcerting in its simplicity and minimalist approach. Observe. Don't interpret. Don't justify. Don't dramatize. Observe. This requires presence. And presence requires courage because you stop fighting and start feeling without losing yourself. There is a huge difference between feeling pain and merging with it. When you merge, the pain becomes identity. It becomes, this is who I am. This is my life. This defines me. When you observe, the pain becomes experience. Something that is happening within you, not something that you are. This distinction seems subtle, but it changes everything at a conscious level. The practice begins with something almost childlike in its directness. Naming, not to label but to create inner space. This is pain. It's not me. It's not my essence. It's a sensation present now. This is a thought. It's not an absolute fact. It's not an eternal truth. It's a mental construct arising in this instant. This is passing now, even if slowly, even if in waves, even if it returns later. Still, it's in motion. Notice how this changes your relationship with suffering. Instead of fighting against it, you approach it with curiosity. Instead of pushing it away, you give it space. And paradoxically, it is in this space that the pain begins to lose its rigidity. Because suffering feeds on contraction, resistance, and total identification. Pain demands presence, not struggle. This phrase isn't motivational. It's almost a manual for emotional survival. Because every time you fight against pain, you create a second suffering. The suffering of not accepting that you are suffering. Presence dissolves this extra layer. It doesn't eliminate the feeling immediately, but it prevents it from becoming a fixed narrative. In practice, this means something very concrete in everyday life. When a memory arises, you don't need to follow it to the end. You can simply note memory. When an emotion appears in your body, you don't need to explain it. You can feel its texture, tightness, weight, warmth, emptiness. When a thought persists, you can recognize recurring thought and return to something simple, like your breath, the contact of your feet with the ground, the sounds around you. This isn't about running away. This is about grounding yourself in the present. It's about bringing the experience into the now, where life truly happens. The past only has power because it's reactivated in the present. When you learn to be consciously present, the past loses its power to automatically hijack your attention. And here's an essential point. Letting go doesn't happen all at once. It's not an event. It's a process. Sometimes you let go for a few minutes and then find yourself holding on again. That's not failure. That's practice. Awareness is built on the return, not on perfection. Each time you realize you've merged and returned to observation, something silently reorganizes itself. There is also a subtle relief that begins to emerge when you stop demanding that the pain go away so that you can be at peace. Because, as long as peace depends on the absence of pain, you remain a prisoner. But when peace is born from the ability to be with what arises, something matures internally. You don't become numb, you become more whole. This path is profoundly human. It doesn't transform you into someone cold, distant, or indifferent. On the contrary, it increases sensitivity without increasing suffering. The pain continues to be felt, but it doesn't spread to everything. It occupies its rightful place, not the entirety of your life. Perhaps you'll realize that upon observing, older layers emerge. Emotions that had no name, tensions that you normalized. This is part of it. Consciousness illuminates, and that which is illuminated requires care, not judgment. That's why this practice isn't aggressive. It's gentle and firm at the same time. And if all of this resonated with you, I want to know. At the end, leave a comment with one of these phrases, whichever best matches your current moment. I am learning to observe. I am confused by the pain. I want presence. Or I am tired of fighting. If you prefer something simpler, just comment with one word: presence, observation, or now. This helps this space continue to exist and prepares the ground for the next point where everything begins to fit together even more deeply. There's a moment on the conscious path when something shifts inside. It's not an explosive relief, nor a feeling of emotional victory. It's quieter than that, almost imperceptible. You realize that pain still exists, but it no longer occupies everything. It's there, present, but it no longer dominates the entire space of your experience. And it's precisely here that many people get confused, because we've been taught to believe that peace is synonymous with the absence of suffering, as if life could only be fully lived when everything was resolved. But Zen wisdom points in a completely different direction. It doesn't promise an end to pain. It reveals something deeper. Peace doesn't come when the pain goes away. It comes when you stop running away from it. Escaping pain doesn't just mean consciously avoiding it. Escaping can mean constantly distracting yourself, filling every silence, rationalizing everything, transforming feelings into discourse, occupying your mind so you don't listen to your body. Escaping can mean living on autopilot, always projected into the future or stuck in the past, rarely inhabiting the present. And the curious thing is that this escape is usually very active. It seems like strength, but it's fear disguised as movement. When you stop running away, it doesn't mean you surrender to suffering. It means you change the quality of your attention. You stop looking at pain as an enemy and begin to perceive it as a messenger. Not in a mystical sense, but in a psychological and human sense. Pain shows where there is resistance, where there is attachment, where something calls for integration. Peace, in this context, is not a heightened emotional state. It is a different relationship with what arises. It is the ability to remain present even when the experience is uncomfortable. This requires emotional maturity, body awareness, inner silence. It requires accepting that life does not follow a straight line of continuous resolution, but an organic movement of arising and dissolving. There is something profoundly liberating when you understand that you don't need to wait to be well to be at peace. You don't need to be healed to be whole. You don't need to eliminate pain to rest. Rest comes when you stop fighting against it. When the body stops fighting, the mind slows down. And in that space, something naturally reorganizes itself. Notice how the pain changes when you don't run, when you don't try to name it too much or explain it too much, when you simply allow it to be felt, breathed, perceived. It doesn't magically disappear, but it loses density. It ceases to be a threat and becomes a transient phenomenon within a larger field of consciousness. This is the point where philosophy ceases to be a concept and becomes an experience, where Zen ceases to be aesthetics and becomes a living practice. Minimalist, direct, without excess, without unrealistic promises, just raw, honest, human presence. Perhaps you'll realize that peace isn't something that arrives, but something that reveals itself when you stop searching outside. It was already there, hidden behind resistance. And the more you allow yourself to feel without identifying with it, the more you realize there's an inner space untouched by pain. A space that observes, that sustains, that welcomes. This doesn't mean you'll never suffer again. It means that suffering ceases to be absolute. It comes, it passes, it returns, it transforms, but you are no longer completely lost within it. You learn to stay, to breathe, to get through it. Now, allow yourself a few seconds of inner silence. Don't fill this space with thoughts. Just notice how your body is right now. Where is there tension? Where is there openness? Where is there tiredness? Where is there calm? Don't change anything. Just observe. This simple gesture is already practice. It's already presence. It's already the beginning of something different. If this moment touched you in any way, please leave a comment. It can be something simple, like, I don't want to run away anymore. I can stay. I breathe. Or just one word, peace, silence, presence. Writing this isn't for me. It's for you. It's a conscious milestone that something has been seen. And from here, there is even more to be understood, felt, and integrated.